Time our politicians just bring in policies too, for sure.
Incidentally, we have several more stories.
The legislature was carefully crafted to
22.2% inflation rates as of April this year. What does that say about where we are as a country?
I think Nigeria has resorted to being resilient.
Before you call a police station, before they even leave, they'll take permission from
I don't think there's really anything on ground to improve.
the struggle, the ASU strike.
You have done your work and put us to the wall. We are not your slaves. I'm not a small boy. You should have given me the report. I have not seen the report.
Hello and welcome to Global Morning. It's a Monday, a new business week in front of us. What you want to do with it is totally up to you. I've made my choice. I'm here and getting my job started, legitimately so. But again, it's a pleasure knowing that you're joining us on the program this morning. I'm Uyag Mofwebe. We are in Abuja, the national capital of Nigeria. And this is where we're going to have very salient, timely conversations today and in the days that follow about issues of national interests, especially given where we are today as a country and knowing that Nigeria is fast evolving in several areas and sectors. However, the challenges that this country grapples with are still very much palpable, and we see the impacts across the board. As of today, one of those challenges is the lingering tussle, as it were. Some people say conflicts between the organized labor and the federal government. Of course, this is not the first time that we will see this sort of situation between the government and workers in Nigeria. However, the difference with these is that it's coming in the face of very nasty economic hardship for the people of this great country, and that further complicates the problem. For instance, Labour says, look, we are sick and tired of receiving 30,000 naira as minimum wage in the face of socio-economic hardship that nobody can pretend to either not be feeling or be aware of. And to add to that, Labour is also saying there are still states that are struggling to pay 30,000. In any case, they are asking how much is a bag of rice today, and people talk about how that even tomato, which is not supposed to be luxurious, has become an essential commodity to the extent that it has become, it's faster getting out of the reach of the everyday person in Nigeria. So these are some of the challenges. Therefore, Labour says, first, government removed fuel subsidy about a year ago. That had its bite because all of a sudden, petrol price shot from something in the neighborhood of 200 naira to as far as, as high as excess of 700 naira. In some cases, we had seen cities across this country where petrol pump price had even risen to as high as 800 to 900. In some cases, we had 1,000 naira. But give or take, we're looking at something around 700 for petrol today. So Labour says that has tripled over time, which has had its impact on fares, cost of transportation and even cost of food. Look at inflation number today in Nigeria, whether it's food inflation or the standard inflation. And then you look at the foreign exchange parity, look at what the naira is doing against the dollar, and then that gives you an insight into how far we have come or how further we have moved from where we were just about a year or maybe say 18 months ago. So these are some of the issues agitating Labour on the one hand. So Labour is saying we want to be paid 615,000 naira minimum wage. Of course, when that happened, everybody held their heads and said, look, yes, we want workers to be well paid. We want Nigerians generally to be able to have a decent living. However, this is not economically realistic. So negotiations started. Now, cut a long story short, as of today, the federal government says we can offer 60,000 naira, which even the organized private sector, including the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, have accepted. However, Labour says we won't accept 60,000. As a matter of fact, the minimum we can accept is 497 naira, which is just 3,000 naira shy of half a million, 500,000. All right, and federal government says we can't pay that because we don't have the money to do that. After all, both the federal and state governments have been struggling to pay 30,000 naira. All right, so there has been this string of arguments back and forth. In the last few days, A couple of meetings between the federal government and leaders of the labor unions have been deadlocked. Just yesterday, one more effort was made by the leadership of the National Assembly, represented by the President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, and of course his counterparts in the House of Representatives, that's the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Tajuddin Abbas. They say, look, let's meet with the leaders of labor. And we understand that they did that in collaboration with the Nigerian Governors Forum. And then they invited the leadership of labor, represented again by Joe Ajero, who is the president of the Nigeria Labour Congress, and his counterpart from the Trade Union Congress, Osifu, to say, Festus Osifu, to say, look, let's see how we can one more time put our heads together and find a lasting, sustainable solution to, first, these issues around the indefinite strike that kicks in today, and then second, going forward, how we are able to resolve the lingering crisis. But this issue has become even more complicated than that, because the Attorney General of the Federation, who doubles as Minister of Justice, Lateef Fagbemi, has written to the leadership of Labour to say, look, this strike, this indefinite strike that you have called for is unconstitutional and illegal. And we'll talk to you about that when we return from this break. We appreciate you staying with us. I opened this show all by myself, but now I have company. Queen Agaba is on Global Morning. Welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Let me not treat you like my guest, because obviously you're a co-host. Yesterday, you and I were here working, so I'm not going to be too formal by asking how was your weekend and all of that.
Of course, we spent it working.
Yes, we did. We did. So, well, it's the call of duty, as they call it, right? But just a while ago, I was talking about labor and the indefinite strike that starts today. And we've seen all of the efforts being made by, collaboration between the labor leaders and the federal government delegation, led basically by the Minister of State for Labor and Employment. And we have not seen a headway. As a matter of fact, Labor has said, regardless of all of these meetings, we are going ahead with the strike. And that strike, we understand, starts today. They say it's indefinite strike, and you know what that means. And what makes it a bit more interesting, which is, again, disturbing, is the fact that Labour now says, until federal governments, as it were, agrees to its demands, it will not call off the strike. That's on the one hand. On the other hand, the federal government says, we can't pay what you're asking for, which is just something in the neighborhood of 500,000 naira. And Labour says, we're not good with 60,000, we cannot accept 60,000. In the meantime, the organized private sector, basically the Manufacturers Association of Nigeria, have said, we are fine with 60,000, we will pay 60,000. But Labour's argument is, in the face of this economic hardship, when even 60,000 can't buy you a bag of rice, on what grounds are we going to accept that? I know you are not part of the NLC or TUC, but you can relate with the issues.
I can relate to the issue because even though I'm not a part of the NLC, I'm a part of the workforce.
Right.
I'm Nigerian, and yes, and 60,000 naira, in all honesty, is not realistic. I mean, you can attest to the fact that 60,000 naira is not realistic at this point in time following the economic hardship. And like they rightly put it, 60,000 naira cannot get you a bag of rice. 60,000 naira cannot transport you for a month to and fro work, regardless of where you work. So of what use? Yes, it is. You and I know the cost of fuel. You and I know the cost of transportation. So if you're moving from point A to point B, let's say you of course, we're not factoring that in, but we're saying for standards, 60,000 naira for transport. I mean, that money covers for most of the people working their transports because, you know, they live quite a distance from where they work.
For example, somebody works with a ministry or parastatal of government in the central area, and then they leave, for those who live in Abuja anyway, maybe far away, Kubwa, Day,
exactly.
and Dutse, and maybe
will be spending
Gwagwalada.
A 1.5 thereabouts for going and coming. So put them together
in
approximately 3,000 naira daily or 3.5 daily.
So in a week, you would have done, give or take 15,000.
15,000 naira. And in a month, that should be
60,000.
60,000 naira.
That's minus Friday and Saturday.
Obviously. And then we have people who work Fridays, who work Saturdays as well. So put that together and see how much they spend on transportation. So let's be realistic. The federal government is saying that, oh, they can only afford to pay 60,000 naira. That's not realistic enough. I know that from the negotiations, the NLC is saying 415,000 naira or 400,000 naira thereabout is only so that they can come to a ground that will be favorable for both parties. Not, but of course, 400,000 naira is realistic with this economy. If you want people to save and live standard lives, you know, be able to live comfortably. I mean, what is the essence of working and not having anything to show for it? You don't have savings, you don't have, you know, literally living from hand to mouth. That's not the system that we want. But thank God to some of the schemes that have been, the policies that have been introduced by the federal government, like the borrower, this scheme.
Okay, the credit scheme.
The credit scheme, consumer credit scheme that is being introduced, or, you know, and all of those things that would help, you know, to cushion the effects of the hardship. But the question now is, how sustainable would that be? How is it going to see the light of day? How is it going to be monitored?
Even in the life of this administration
that we have, yes, we have beautiful policies that are being introduced, beautiful initiatives that would help. But the problem is, will it get to the people that is ought to get to? Will it be the consistency, the sustainability of this scheme is what we're talking about. But for the indefinite strike by the labor, by the NLC now is, we know what this is going to do for, the effect of this indefinite strike and how it's going to affect a whole lot of things. But I think this is the only way that for now they can air their grievances, because these negotiations are not forthcoming, and so I think for them this is the only way out.
They can vent.
They can vent so that the federal government can, you know, come to a more realistic negotiation.
It's interesting because as we speak right now, I'm sure even journalists, our colleagues are all on the field wanting to catch, a bit to catch a piece of the action, as I say. But it doesn't take away from the fact that business activities, to a very large extent, we grind to a halt for the most part. Today, the Attorney General of the Federation, I cited that a while ago, who is also Minister of Justice, Lateef Fagbemi, has written to the leadership of the organized labor to say this indefinite strike that you've called for is illegal, because he says there's a subsisting National Industrial Court order stopping labor from going on strike. That's the one thing. The second is, according to him, there's a dispute act, all right, Labor Dispute Act of 2004, that provides that labor must give a minimum of 15-day notices prior to calling for strike. So the argument is whether or not Labour has done that, and so on and so forth. And then there's also the argument of, well, given that the federal government and all other critical stakeholders are working tooth and nail to ensure that we run circles around this economic hardship, it is morally wrong for Labour to be calling out workers at this time. Do you think that argument is valid?
Whether Labour has given a 15-day ultimatum, maybe in writing, no. But we see that the the NLC has been saying that, we would go for strike if negotiations, they have been saying these things.
At least for a couple of weeks till this time.
Yes, more than 15 days. But whether it's in writing, I don't know. But that they've been giving pointers to the fact that if we don't come to a mutual negotiation, a negotiation that is beneficial for the workers, Nigerian workers, we would go on strike. They've been putting this out there. Would have an indefinite strike if after so and so. As regards calling Nigerian workers at this point in time to a strike, I want to ask, what is the other way out that we could have,
be explored?
Yes. What are the other ways that we could, because it's almost like calling for a negotiation, a sit-out with the federal government and the NLC there's no headway, in all of this, because the federal government has said this is how much we can afford to pay for now. They went from a 40 to a 57, from a 45 to a 57, and now 60, and there's no going up anymore. And I would like to know the other ways that could have been explored, because I think those other ways, for the most that I have seen, I don't know how fruitful these ways have yielded in the past that we've seen. They say, okay, there are other ways of getting a lawyer, negotiations. This is the negotiation we're talking about.
Dialogue after dialogue.
And it's time wasting, you know. So if it's indefinite, it's indefinite, but that doesn't mean that it cannot be called off in 3 days' time, in a week
or
time.
Even today.
Right. So let's see how that plays out.
Yeah, sure. Before we take a break now, because we understand Fadimi has something for us. But then, yesterday there was a meeting of National Assembly leadership. The President of the Senate called for that meeting. His counterpart from the House of Representatives, Tajuddin Abbas, the Speaker of the House, was also there. The leaders of the organized labor were there, Joe Ajero and Festus Osifo. Of course, from the federal government side proper, I'd like to say, the Minister of State for Labor and Employment was there representing the federal government officially. And she presented again the 60,000 naira offer, and she says it is a 100% increase. All right, so there's a bit of math and statistics in this, because she says, we're paying 30,000. Now we have done a 100% increase, which is from 30 to 60. Consider accepting that. But again, like you rightly pointed out, Labour's argument is, what can we do with 60 when everybody goes to the same market, including those of you who work for the government and the Minister of State for Labour?
Some of you spend 60,000 naira a day.
Yeah, exactly, or even way more than that. All right, so I think, like you said, dialogue is the way to go. Otherwise, this will grind the country to a halt. And you know what they say about when two elephants fight, the grass suffers.
Ultimately.
All right, so let's not suffer too much. Let's eat something. Fatime Abbas Umar has something for us.
I'm delighted to have you here with me on Taste and Texture. I'm Fatime Abomar. Today we'll be making a new twisted kinda northern dish, brabisco, but this time with gari. This meal is quick and easy to prepare. The primary ingredients for making this food is couscous. Couscous is also known as brabisco in some northern parts of Nigeria and is made from corn or wheat grits. Nevertheless, in preparing this meal, couscous is sometimes substituted with gari. When gari is used in preparing this food, lukewarm water is added to it. The gari is then stirred with a fork so it doesn't form a solid mold. The small disjointed lumps of the gari are what is required in preparing brabisco. The ingredients needed for this brabisco dish are 1 cup of gari, 1 cup of chopped vegetables, green pepper, a handful of chopped onions, 1 cup of shredded chicken, 1 tablespoon of butter, 2 cooking spoons of groundnut oil, seasoning cubes, 2 cloves of garlic, 1 tablespoon of grated ginger, 1 teaspoon of chili pepper, and now let's make it. Wash and season the shredded chicken with garlic, ginger, and seasoning cube. In a pan, heat up the butter and groundnut oil and stir in the shredded chicken. Sprinkle the chili pepper and taste for seasoning and add more as needed. Once the chicken has browned and is cooked, add the vegetables and stir in. In a separate bowl, add some tepid water to the gari and stir with a fork so it doesn't form a solid mold. Pour in your chicken and vegetables into the bowl of gari and stir it properly combined. Serve and enjoy. That's all for today. See you same time next time for another scrumptious episode of Text and Texture.
Fatima Abba, I should say, yes, Umar, thank you for that sharp and very precise recipe that you gave to us there. We hope we find time to try it out. I can't give you my word that I will. Maybe Queen will make the efforts. I mean, being a lady and all of that. Our second discussion, by the way, today focuses on not just the first 1 year in office of President Bola Tinubu, but what lies ahead. 3 years is in front of him, all right? We can continue to debate about how or what he has done with the last 1 year, the past 1 year, but we probably should now be more concerned about what will happen with the next 3 years of the life of this government. But we have all of that for you once we return from this break. But again, that will be after the Global AM News. Do stay with us, everyone.
Hello and welcome to all our viewers in Nigeria and around the world to News AM on Global Television. We are live in the nation's capital, Abuja. I am Queen Agaba. Vice President Kashim Shettima has urged Nigerian lawyers to be unwavering in their defense of the rule of law, justice and judicial autonomy, saying these pillars are crucial for sustaining the nation's democratic ideals. Shettima made the call in Ilorin, Kwara State, where he applauded President Bola Tinubu's non-interference in election precedents that favored opposition parties, as well as his refusal to weaponize state instruments to protect perceived allies on trial. The vice president noted that President Tinubu's hands-off approach had strengthened Nigeria's democracy, setting a precedent for future administrations to uphold the independence of the judiciary. He urged legal practitioners to emulate this spirit, noting that true lawyers are those who meticulously prepare for court, argue based on facts and legal principles, and courageously challenge injustice wherever it exists. A politician and social commentator, Jafar Sani Bello, has called on Kano State Governor Abba Yusuf to prioritize paying attention to providing good governance and dividends of democracy to the people of his state. Sharon Ajay has details.
Bello, who was reacting to the conflict over the Emirate of Kano on a special edition of Global Television's program Big Talk, stated that even though there have been multiple court orders on the basis of the conflict, the most appropriate of them, based on jurisdiction, should be obeyed by all parties.
The way forward here is for respect for the rule of law. There are conflicting court orders, but there are a plethora of cases that have been decided by the Supreme Court, that wherever there are conflicting orders of courts with concurrent jurisdiction, the one that precedes takes precedence.
He noted that considering the complication associated with the Emirate tussle, intervention of President Bola Tinubu will be required to resolve the conflicts.
I think going forward, the president needs to act. He needs to call Senator Rabiu Musa Kwankwaso to order. That, look, I'm the president of this country, and your gross with the late Emir of Kano, your gross that your local government has been excised from Kano to another Emirate Council of Karai, should not form the basis to plunge one of the most populous states in the country I govern into crisis.
In the meantime, Muhammadu Sanusi II and Aminu Ado Bayero have been holding court in two different palaces. Sharon Ajay reporting for Global TV News.
The Socio-Economic Rights and Accountability Project, SARAP, has called on Nigeria's 36 state governors to disclose comprehensive details regarding the state independent electoral commissions operated within their jurisdictions. SARAP says this is in a bid to enhance transparency and accountability in the electoral process. In an official statement on Sunday, it urged the governors to promptly reveal crucial information concerning the chairpersons and members of the respective commissions, including their qualifications, political affiliations, if any, and the mechanisms surrounding their appointments. Less than 24 hours to the start of the nationwide strike over a new national minimum wage and hike in electricity tariff, the Nigerian Labour Congress, NLC, has directed its state council across the country to ensure total compliance. This came to light on a day unions in the oil, electricity, financial and other critical sectors pledged total support for the indefinite strike declared by NLC and its counterpart, the Trade Union Congress of Nigeria. The two labor centers had last Friday announced an indefinite nationwide strike from Monday today over alleged government's failure to agree on a new national minimum wage and reverse the recent hike in electricity tariff. Meanwhile, in a bid to avert the planned nationwide strike, the President of the Senate, Godswill Akpabio, and the leadership of the Nigerian Governors Forum have reportedly invited the leadership of the organized labor for an emergency meeting. Sources familiar with the matter said the president of the NLC, Joe Ajaero, had announced the strike followed failed negotiations between the government and organized labor. The National Agency for Food and Drug Administration and Control, NAFDAC, has warned Nigerians against the hazardous practice of using dangerous chemicals to preserve food items. The agency specifically emphasized on the dangers associated with diclovos, a chemical commonly utilized by traders to safeguard food from spoilage. Director General of the agency, Professor Mojisola Adeyeye, underscored the toxicity of diclovos to human health, cautioning that its use can have fatal consequences. President Bola Tinubu has ordered security agents to go after the killers of 5 soldiers in Aba, Abia State, and those behind the call for a seated home in Southeast. The president stated that on no account should anyone under any guise have the audacity to kill agents of the state. The president, who was reacting to the murder of 5 soldiers in Aba on Thursday, May 30th, by elements suspected to be members of the indigenous people of Biafra, IPOB, warned that the federal government will come down heavily against those who have made it a habit to needlessly attack officers and men of the armed forces. The slain soldiers were on peacekeeping duty in Aba, Abia State on Thursday when they were murdered, just 2 months after a similar tragic incident happened in Okwama, Delta State. Delta State is to get a Federal University of Agriculture as the House of Representatives Committee on Agricultural Colleges and Institutions holds a public hearing on some bills that seek to establish new institutions in the sector. The House had mandated the committee, chaired by Honorable Hakeem Adeniyi Adeyemi, to consider 9 bills which seek to establish new agricultural universities, colleges, and institutes across the country. Minister of Solid Minerals Development, Dele Alake, says the federal government will deploy technology for the surveillance of mining sites across the country. Alake said the technology would be in addition to the 2,220 personnel of the Mining Marshal Corps drawn from the Nigeria Security and Civil Defense Corps to combat illegal mining. The corps, deployed across the 36 states of the Federal Capital Territory, were also trained on modern warfare by the military to secure Nigeria's natural resources. The National Association of Nigerian Students, NANS, has advised the Bola Tinubu-led administration to align itself with the demands of the organized labor. NANS, in a statement signed by its president, Pedro Obi, stood in solidarity with the Nigerian Labour Congress and Trade Union Congress in their call for an increase in the national minimum wage. The Kogi State government has announced the rescue of the remaining 8 kidnapped students of Confluence University of Science and Technology, or SARA, bringing the numbers of rescued students to 30. 2 of the abducted students were, however, killed last week by the abductees, following the state government's decision not to pay ransom for the victims, but rather embarked on kinetic and non-kinetic onslaught against the kidnappers. This latest development was revealed on Sunday in a statement by the State Commissioner for Information and Communication, Kingsley Fanwo. The Kogi State government announced the rescue of the remaining 8 kidnapped students of Confluence University of Science and Technology. At least 4 traders have reportedly lost their lives due to a severe rainstorm, accompanied by strong winds at the Ibrahim Babangida Square in Bauchi State, the venue of the recently concluded Northeast Trade Fair. The storm, which began on Saturday night, resulted in the death of 2 people and caused significant damage to the Gombe and Yobe State pavilions, as well as several business stands within the trade complex, while 2 other victims who sustained injuries later died at the Abubakar Tafawa Balewa University Teaching Hospital. You're watching the AM News, coming to you live from Nigeria's capital, Abuja. We're on Star Times, channel 276. Kindly follow us on all social media platforms using @Global TV NG and other handles now showing on your screen. When the AM News returns, Senate bows to pressure, suspends action an amendment of CBN Act. This and other stories coming right after this break. Do stay with us. Many thanks for staying with us. Now, if you've just joined us, this is Global Television bringing you live broadcast of the AM News. On the foreign scene, Hala Tómasdóttir, an entrepreneur, has won Iceland's presidential election and will take over the mostly ceremonial role from incumbent Guðni Jóhannesson. Tómasdóttir, 55, received 34% of the votes cast in Saturday's election in the North Atlantic nation to beat former Prime Minister Katrín Jakobsdóttir, who stepped down as premier in April to run for president. She garnered 25% of votes. The president, who is elected for a 4-year term, carries limited political powers, but often acts as a uniting figure in the island nation of almost 400,000 people, which is a NATO member. An aide to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed on Sunday that Israel had accepted a framework deal for winding down the Gaza war, now being advanced by U.S. President Joe Biden, though he described it as flawed and in need of much more work. There are a lot of details to be worked out, adding that Israeli conditions, including the release of the hostages and the destruction of Hamas as a genocidal terrorist organization, have not changed. Biden, whose initial lockstep support for Israel's offensive has given way to open censor of the operation's high civilian death toll on Friday, aired what he described as a 3-phase plan submitted by the Netanyahu government to end the war. As we turn to business, the value of Nigeria's pension funds rose to 19.73 trillion naira in April, following a 0.47% decline that it recorded in March. According to the latest figure from the National Pension Commission, this is about a 0.60% increase. The value of the pension funds as of February stood at 19.76 trillion naira. Similarly, the membership of the retirement savings account also grew to over 10 million in March, signaling an increase of about 0.33% month on month. The Senate has bowed to public pressure by suspending the planned public hearing on the amendment of the Central Bank of Nigeria Act 2007 to allow for further consultations and input from key stakeholders. This is coming as the Apex Bank yesterday issued further clarification on the 50% balance of the repatriated export proceeds, saying that the balance of the proceeds may be sold to authorized dealers or eligible users of foreign exchange with eligible transactions. The Senate Committee on Banking, Insurance and Other Financial Institutions said the suspension followed the controversy generated by the amendment process for the bill. ExxonMobil has stated that it is awaiting the Nigerian National Petroleum Company Limited to lift the injunction preventing the sale of its assets to Seplat Energy. The company's regional communications manager, Africa, Oge Udwaga, disclosed to newsmen while responding to an inquiry. It was reported earlier that the NNPC had on Thursday confirmed it has signed a settlement agreement with ExxonMobil companies in Nigeria over the proposed divestment of 100% interest in Mobil producing Nigeria Unlimited to Seplat Energy. In sports, Zhilei Zhang has knocked out Deontay Wilder in the 5th round of their fight in Riyadh with an explosive right hook that floored his opponent. Wilder had been knocked off balance by Zhang's previous blow, and then the Chinese heavyweight closed in to finish the job. It capped off a remarkable night for Frank Warren's Queensberry promotion in Riyadh, who completed a clean sweep over Eddie Hearn's Matchroom Boxing. Captain Junior Unduka came up with a huge stoppage time winner for Reno Stars as the Sky Blue Stars beat former champions Kano Pillars 2-1 in Ikene on March Day 34 of the Nigeria Premier Football League to keep their title hopes alive. The Navy encounter looked set for potentially damaging stalemate for Remo Stars, but Unduka benefited from a goalkeeping error by Kano Pillars keeper Mohamed Galadima and sent the home fans into a frenzy for their first win over Kano Pillars in the NPFL. The win took Remo to 59 points and 1 point adrift of Rangers, who play Sporting Lagos at the Mobolaji Johnson Arena. That's it on the AM News, and it came to you live from Nigeria's capital, Abuja. We're on Star Times channel 276. Kindly follow us across all social media platforms using @Global TV NG and other handles now showing on your screen. I'm Queen Agaba. Thank you for watching. See you again.
Hello, sport fans. Let's begin from Spain, where Spanish giants Real Madrid have reclaimed their position as Europe's most valuable football club. Los Blancos, who go in search of a record-extending 15th Champions League win, have already secured the La Liga title this term, have been valued at £4.4 billion. According to an annual ranking of the 32 most valuable football club in Europe by Football Benchmark, an economic data platform, Manchester City had overtaken Madrid Madrid last year, but fall to second in the standings with a valuation of £4.3 billion, though they will be treated to still be clear of their city rivals United with the valuation of £4.2 billion. In total, 6 Premier League clubs make up the top 10 of the list, with Liverpool, Tottenham, Chelsea and Arsenal joining their English rivals in 5th, 7th, 9th and 10th place respectively. Remarkably, all clubs within the top 10 have a valuation in excess of €3 billion. Anthony Martial has announced his Manchester United exit, and the French forward looks to have a number of options when it comes to his next club. Martial took to social media earlier this week, confirmed that he would be leaving Old Trafford, bringing his 9 years at the club to an end. Injuries have plagued the Frenchman over recent seasons, but has not dated potential suitors, according to Sky Sports. They report that Ligue 1 Lyon and Marseille are both interested in acquiring his services this summer. Martial began his career at Lyon, joining the club at the age of 14. Turkish Super League side Beşiktaş are also said to be contemplating a move for the 28-year-old. Martial's contract has been allowed to expire, meaning he is available as a free agent. Clubs Saudi Arabia and the MLS and Mexico are also believed to be monitoring the situation, but the player would prefer to remain in Europe. Jose Mourinho has reportedly reached an agreement to become the new Fenerbahce manager on a 2-year contract. The Portuguese boss is set to replace Ismail Kartal at the Turkish giant, according to journalist Gianluca Di Marzio, in what would be his 11th managerial role. Mourinho, 61, is set to succeed the Turkish boss after Fener finished second in the Turkish Super League for the 3rd straight year. It is believed that Mourinho is to return to the game after being sacked by Roma in January after 2.5 years in charge of the Italian side. Previous reports claim Mourinho was a target of Saudi Arabian club Al Qadisiyah, but seemingly his next destination is Turkey. Monaco midfielder Mohamed Kamara has been suspended for 4 games after taping over the LGBTQ logo on his kit. Kamara, a Muslim, covered up the badge on the front of his shirt with white tape as Monaco beat Nantes 4-0 in the final League One match of the season, with the 24-year-old scoring a penalty in that game. He didn't take part in the initiative because of religious reasons. The French Football League released a statement which read, after hearing the player Mohamed Kamara and noting his refusal during the meeting to carry out one or more actions to raise awareness of the fight against homophobia, the commission decided to impose a 4-match suspension.
And the show returns, this time behind the news. Two conversations are in front of us this morning. The first, like we already highlighted, will be focused on the strike by the organized labor. Not just this immediate one that they say begins today and is indefinite, but strikes in all, altogether. Just a while ago, while we took a break, I was talking with a colleague in our workstation, and he was talking about how that you'll be shocked what done with NLC now, or combination of NLC and TUC, or organized labor as you call it. The next thing you know is ASO will also kick in and say, well, we realize that there are some clauses or some items in our 2009 agreements that has not been or have not been fulfilled by the government. We want to have that conversation now, so let's come to the dialogue table. Personally, even though I'm not a member of ASU, I don't think I'm going to get past that strike so fast, because it affected me back then in school as well, because I was just getting into school, the strike happened. In fact, I had not even been cleared. All right. So much as I know ASU membership or leadership will always want to push that conversation, I also have very disturbing memories about it. But the point my colleague was making a while ago is that we cannot continue to have a culture of strike. But it's not enough to say, let's end this culture of strike. It will be common sense to say, let's address the issues that even occasion strike in the first instance. And then we have a second conversation this morning. Last week, we took the entire time to talk about President Bola Tinubu's 1 year in office. We looked at sectoral impact. We looked at policy formulation, implementation, and thrusts against the backdrop of the renewed hope agenda. Of course, as is always the case, you would realize that there were people who said, well, the president may not have done it all, but let's cut the man the slack. He didn't meet the country in a very good place, so he has spent the last 1 year trying to do very critical fixing. And as such, we should not be too harsh in our assessment of him. Plus, ministers didn't come on board until towards the end of August, third week of August, end of third week of August, and all of that. And then, on the other hand, you have those who say, look, any government that is serious should have been able to do far more within 1 year. Because we also realize that a former minister in this same APC government, even though not under not in the administration of President Bola Tinubu, talking about former Lagos State Governor Raji Babatunde Fashola, had also said before coming to office, when PDP was in power, that a responsible government should be able to fix the power sector in 6 months. And Nigerians gave him 3.5 years. He couldn't fix it.
Sorry, that Nigeria's power sector is deep-rooted. The issues
exactly.
that, affecting the power sector is deep-rooted. It is easier to say. Let me not say, it's easier to say from afar, from a distance, that, okay, this is this and this and this and this. Surface level, you think you can fix it, but it's at the surface level. If you don't fix it from its roots, from the root causes, we're still going to be circling around the issues
same old
of power. Yes, same old until we get back to nothing. So it's just like running in circles and just, basically a rigmarole. And doing activities here, there's an increase in tariff, but still we have issues with constant electricity. Just playing around, which can be draining at times. So our question now should be, to the Minister of Power, what are the issues? What are the causes? Where do we begin? Can we stop addressing things at the surface level and address things from the root causes? What do we need to look at, first of all, so that it's not an exercise in futility at the end of the day, when you just want to, so that I am seen, because one of the issues and the problems that we have with ministers and leaders is that they want to be seen doing something.
So it's a performance syndrome.
Yes, without having to check the root causes. That's why we see that today they're building bridges and doing this and this and that, and then at the end of the day, the bridges are, maybe it collapses, or it is not meeting standards, or it is not helping, it's as good as to
solve the problem that it was meant to solve.
It was meant to solve, or it's rather creating more problems. So this is just in my name that I'm commissioning this, I'm doing this, and opening this, and doing that.
I commissioned 67 projects.
Exactly. I'm doing this and these projects. At the end of the day, the buildings are left dilapidated, they are left not taken care of, not maintained. Because these are not the issues. First of all, we're talking about infrastructures, we're building infrastructures, I would give an instance. This is not me being a messenger of doom or being... Wike is doing a great job, quite all right, you know, building roads and all of that. But we don't need roads in the city, in Abuja here. Not like we need roads. But where we should be focused on are other areas in Abuja where there are no roads, you know, those villages around where we need to... within outskirts, these are the places that needs this infrastructure. You know, we cannot continue to be we have passages, we have places that connect, but how about those places, those outskirts that needs this road so that we can be able to, you know, and then I think if we have those roads and places, the cities will be decongested. I don't know if you understand. There will be more houses. There are people who have lands who can't build because there are no roads across these lands, those outskirts. So can it be more developed so that we have, you know, more? These are the things that we're talking about. Not having to have structures and structures and structures at the end of the day. What is very focal and key for the people is not met.
You see, that you're even talking about, for example, you mentioned bridges. That is where bridges are even constructed. You talk about Wike doing a lot of work. I mean, I've spoken with people, the everyday people on the streets, and they seem to rate him impressively high, all right? But we also know how there are ministers, even in this government, who, in a desperation to show off, like you said, to just show that they've been busy working the whole time. Of course, it was close to 1 year in office. Started putting pressure on the ministries, I mean, on the agencies under them, or the parastatals that are affiliated with their ministries, to say, look, show us what you have done, because we need to show something to Mr. President. We need to impress Nigerians. We need to show to them that we've been working the whole time. And then the agencies are saying, look, there are protocols for these things. We didn't get a mandate. We didn't get the go-ahead or a directive to start X, Y, Z. And the minister is saying, look, I don't care how you do it. Just come up with something. Show us something, you know. And at the end of the day, it becomes wishy-washy because there's no substance to it. You just want to show us that we did this and we did that. We know some of those ministries. In fact, during this, what the ministers themselves called the ministerial updates, which before now we thought would be performance review, all right, trying to confuse Nigerians, maybe, I don't know. What would normally happen is that you come, you do your presentation, and then there's a review of the items you've presented in terms of your budget, I mean, your project execution against what you've been, what has been released to you and in that ministry. But then what do you have? Several persons, or at least I spoke with 2 persons who had been to this particular quote and unquote, ministerial updates, and they said, look, this minister were so disappointing. Nothing against them, but I mean, whatever they did should be put out in public. Let Nigerians also judge for themselves, that sort of thing. It means that some of these ministers don't even have a handle on the portfolio that has been assigned to them. They don't have a hang of the task. You know, it's interesting when you hear somebody like the Minister of Health and Social Development, Professor Ali Mohammed Pate, say our work is cut out for us. But the question is, how many ministers even understand the work that has been cut out for them? Because if you do not understand the work cut out for you, I'm not so sure how you're going to get around doing that job.
Absolutely. So, in essence, what we're talking about, what we're saying, what I am saying is that let us focus on energy in addressing root causes.
Yeah,
you know,
not just symptoms.
You clearly put it, not just symptoms and not just short-term, a way to
quick fixes.
Fix it short-term on the surface level. But let us do the hard work. But another thing is, nobody wants to begin because we think that, okay, if we want to address these things from the root causes, it might take the whole of my tenure and then someone else gets the glory. You get? So we would rather do it on the surface level so that it's in my name that I did this and did this. And at the end of the day,
I don't care what the adverse impact is.
What the adverse effect and impact is. And at the end of the day, what you did is not sustainable, but you have it to your name that you did this and did this. But can we put Nigerians first? Can we put the people that we are called to serve first? Let it be that if I do this, I'm addressing this from the root cause. I'm addressing this from the very foundation. Whether or not I complete it before the end of my tenure, I want to believe, but that's the thing with leadership. I want to believe that the next person that comes, you know, will complete this project, complete this, so that at the end of the day, these people can be happy. These people can,
let us see these projects having real measurable impact on them.
Exactly, real measurable impact. Let it be that this is what government is supposed to be. This is what leadership is supposed to be. The people are supposed to be focal, at the center of it all, at the core of it all. Let us stop being, you know, at the surface level to my name. Can we just, you know, put that aside and put the people first?
Put country first.
Put country first. Put the people first. I think, number one, that is one of the issues that needs to be addressed, that we address things from the very foundation and not just do things shabbily. Haphazardly, because we want to have it to our names. That way, I think we'll be living for humanity and we'll be living a sustainable trait, something that is long-term and not just short-term.
You know, again, no matter what we talk about on the program and all other programs we have lined up on global television today, it will appear the strike, indefinite strike called by Labour, will be the dominating factor ultimately. We're going to play you a report by Queen Agaba very soon. I mean, you spoke with some persons on the streets last week about the minimum wage, and what's the sense you're getting from what Nigerians feel about this whole conversation?
You know, a lot of Nigerians think that it is realistically okay what the
Labour
is asking for. That, you know, a 400,000 naira minimum wage is okay. But if we look at it, while it is realistically okay, because of where we are as a country, I think that it is going to, inflation rate is going to
shoot through the roof,
skyrocket, you know, and then the purchasing power, consumer goods a lot of things are just going to, you know, go south somehow. But Nigerians are saying that 60,000 naira cannot get you a bag of rice. Even 100,000 naira can take you nowhere.
Right.
You want to talk about transport, feeding, talk about basics, toiletries and all of that. 100,000 naira cannot take you anywhere. So what's the way forward? Why they say 400,000 naira is fine, according to NLC, or at least a 200,000 naira thereabouts is okay. The government should be talking about, you know, regulating prices, bringing down, subsidizing some things. We cannot outrightly take subsidy away from a lot of things and expect that people are not going to struggle and all that. So that's my take. But Nigerians, most of people that I spoke to think that it is realistic enough to have, you know, a 200, 400K minimum wage thereabout.
All right, we're just going to take a break now. We'll play you that report by Queen Agaba.
Nigerian workers have expressed frustration over the current minimum wage as they state that it does not meet their basic needs since the cost of living has significantly increased.
Human wants are insatiable. But what is reasonable is that the government should also shift ground. You discover that the things have changed completely. Some have gone as high as 300%. So if at that time minimum wage was 30,000 naira, now they should go as high as 100,000.
The government should do more because with the rate of inflation and price of goods, services and all that rising above 100%, I think the government should do much more better. A 500 is not bad.
A greater number of Nigerians are in support for the NLC's demand for a higher minimum wage.
I would never agree with the federal government with what they are proposing. If I should advise federal government, they are doing minimum wage for an average Nigerian to survive in this kind of economy, this kind of hardship that we are facing, should be 500,000.
Ideally for any common Nigerian, if say we come down to 400, 500,000 as the minimum wage, I think that would be reasonable.
While an increased minimum wage could improve the standard of living for millions of workers, leading to greater economic stability and increased consumer spending, there are, however, concerns that a substantial wage increase could lead to inflationary pressures, with businesses passing the increased labor cost onto consumers. Queen Agaba reporting for Global Television.
Time to take it to the papers now, everyone. We thought we should bring you up to speed regarding the news real quick. This morning we have quite a number of them for you. But quick, I'm sure Queen has the first paper for us this morning.
Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. On the front page of our very first paper for today, which is the Vanguard newspaper, we have the big story: few schools, banks, and others to be shut as strike begins today. Rather, this says TUC directs Pengerson, ASS BFI, senior civil servants to comply. Labour charges workers to beware of government's antics. Your proposed strike, like girl, FG warns NLC and TUC. Suspend nationwide strike. Senate reps begs NLC and TUC. As Akpabio, Abbas, Akume, and others' intervention failed to stop strike, National Minimum Wage Act 2019 has expired, according to Falana. And then we have, just above the nameplate, Zenith Bank emerges most sustainable bank in Nigeria. The problem with Tinubu's misfiring leadership by Akin Usutoku.
That's obviously an opinion.
Yes, his opinion. Nigeria must leverage national assets to attract forex inflow. That's also an opinion. OPay strongly prohibits cryptocurrency and virtual asset trading on its platform. Anxiety as federal government borrows 20.1 trillion naira under Tinubu. Gencos cry out over 3.7 trillion naira debt. That's all we have on the front page of the Vanguard newspaper.
So we'll turn to the business day for you. So for business day, we will begin with the big story real quick. It says CBN sells most dollars in 1 month as liquidity fades. With two riders, $575 million sold in May exceeds March and April combined. That's some quantum leap there in terms of FX sales. Oil companies need to resume dollar sales to banks. How soon will that happen? We'll wait to see. On the right corner of Business Day, it says Nigeria's oil sector turns ghost town as FDI vanishes. Of course, there have been palpable concerns around foreign direct investment, but now this has to particularly do with the oil sector, right? The writer there says country needs $25 billion annually to pump 2 million barrels per day of oil. All right, you can read all of that up when you pick up a copy of today's edition of Business Day. What's more, insurance breathe easy as fire underpricing goes up in flames. Thousands of jobs at risk as higher interest rates hobble businesses. Nigeria's capital importation reports in focus as U.S. eyes on employment data. That's an extensive conversation in itself. But it's the much we have from Business Day. Daily Trust is our next port of call.
Okay. On the front page of the Daily Trust newspaper, we have an advertorial. Then the big story is minimum wage. Strike begins as National Assembly's intervention fails. Strike begins, National Assembly's minimum intervention fails. Rider says Labour's action illegal according to the AGF. Uncertainty over Hajj pilgrims airlift. This strike is definitely going to affect a lot of things. We pray that there are interventions and then possible negotiations. That's all we have on the front page of the Daily Trust. The Punch is our next point of call.
All right, let's bring you the Punch real quick now. A big story, as usual, is the first here. And it reads, minimum wage, AGF tackles Labour as NAS fails to stop strike. Rider reads, AGF says planned strike violates court order. FG insists on 60,000 naira. Okay, top right corner of it, Genco's threatening shutdown as debt hits 3.7 trillion naira. That's a whole lot of money, no doubt. You'll find details for yourself on page 24. And then one here says, Naira devaluation pushes listed firms' forex debt near 4 trillion naira. And what's more, at the very foot of the paper, 24,535 candidates to retake UTME June 22nd. That's according to JAMB. Ex-worker accomplice kill Lagos businessman, steal 3.2 million naira. You wonder how you can take somebody's life just because of 3.2 million naira. Quite a pathetic story.
Pathetic, really pathetic.
CBN clears $830 million foreign airlines trapped funds. That's according to IATA. Okay, that's some backlog of FX obligation then being cleared. One more paper and then we're done. That will be this day, which Queen will bring for us.
On the front page of our very last paper this day, NLC TUC adamant says strike goes on today as negotiation with National Assembly fails. Rider Akpabio strike will bring more hardship. Action premature, illegal, Fagbemi declares. Bala Mohammed says demands not feasible for states. There will be dire economic consequences, Ngelale warns. Sultan appeals to Labour to shelve strike. And then we have above the nameplate, Geregu Siemens partner to raise Nigerian firms' overall power generation capacity to 1,200 megawatts. Wale Edu says economic stabilization package underway to support businesses. Zenith Bank named most sustainable bank in Nigeria in the International Banker Awards 2024. Lastly, Oando turns the corner with 2023 interim results, records 74.7 billion naira profit, 71% increase in turnover. That's all that we have on this day.
You see, there's this story around states saying not feasible. I mean, Bala Mohammed, who is the governor of Bauchi State, saying 60,000 not feasible for states. You know, that conversation actually became a highlight essentially last week, with some people saying, hope we do not get to a point where even after the federal government and the organized labor have reached an agreement, they say, look, this is what we'll be paying going forward. And then the states come up and say, well, exactly, that's for the federal government. We're still struggling with 30,000. We understand a state like Imo pays 40. You have other states like Kwara paying 40 as well. Edo pays 70 right now. We are going to have to argue the economics of all of these variations. However, states must be on board with the federal government, of course, with the labor, with all of this, so that we don't continue to take 2 steps forward and we're taking 6 or even 8 backward by the time we eventually reach an agreement that is between the organized labor and the federal government. So we're taking a quick break now, everyone. When we return, it will be time to bring you big conversations here on the program. Do stay with us.
Many Nigerian workers have expressed frustration over the current minimum wage as they state that it does not meet their basic needs since the cost of living has significantly increased.
Human wants are insatiable. But what is reasonable is that the government should also shift ground. You discover that the things have changed completely. Some have gone as high as 300%. So if at that time minimum wage was 30,000 naira, now they should go as high as 100,000.
The government should do more because with the rate of inflation and price of goods, services and all that rising above 100%, I think the government should do much more better. A 500 is not bad.
A greater number of Nigerians are in support for the NLC's demand for a higher minimum wage.
I would never agree with the federal government with what they are proposing. If I should advise federal government, the ideal minimum wage for an average Nigerian to survive in this kind of economy, this kind of hardship that we are facing, should be 500,000.
Ideally for any common Nigerian, if, say, we come down to 400, 500,000 as the minimum wage, I think that would be reasonable.
While an increased minimum wage could improve the standard of living for millions of workers, leading to greater economic stability and increased consumer spending, there are, however, concerns that a substantial wage increase could lead to inflationary pressures, with businesses passing the increased labor cost onto consumers. Queen Agaba reporting for Global Television.
Let's take you to Benin now, live via Zoom, where Destiny Owobu, an economist and a statistician, is joining us to discuss the economics of strike actions in Nigeria. Destiny, very good morning to you.
Yeah, good morning. I'm excited to be here.
I'm just going to get started asking, for example, I mean, we talk about strikes a lot, how that labor should not embark on a strike, whether it's indefinite or otherwise. But let's look at really the cost of strike actions in this country, whether it's by the organized labor, by some other unions like ASU or whatever name they go by. For example, what does it cost Nigeria every time we go on strike?
The financial costs are in the billions of naira, because Nigeria is largely a government-employed society, and anytime there's a strike action like this, imagine the ports, imagine the civil service generally, imagine the revenue collecting agencies. Everybody is grounded. And so billions of naira are lost in the process, and billions of man hours of productivity is lost. And a lot of people, the economy is grounded to that point, to the value. Some estimates put the cost of an average 2-week strike to about 5 to 10 billion naira. So that's what it is in the financial angle. So it costs a lot anytime Nigeria goes on strike.
Interesting. You know, you just mentioned a 2-week strike that some estimates says could cost the country between 5 and 10 billion. When we look at all this, I mean, the government, for example, quote unquote, is blessed with a good number of, like an array of accountants, economists, and statisticians, I mean, data analysts. Does the government realize this? I mean, the question is, if government realizes how much it costs us to go on strike, for example, will it not be easier to prevent or ward off incidences that could lead to strike rather than allow them happen and then we continue to drive dialogue?
It's not so simple because industrial actions they perform a political social function. It's not every time economists look at the financial cost of something. There's what we call the opportunity cost too, the real cost. Let's look at other elements of cost. What is lost when the Nigerian workers are shortchanged? They are paid less wages that could not take them home, so to speak. They are paid wages that vanish at the rising prices. They are paid wages that impoverishes them and drives them more into poverty. There's a cost attached to that, all right? So the status quo does not necessarily promote efficient economics because there's something we call aggregate demand. And this aggregate demand is influenced by disposable incomes. And these disposable incomes are the incomes we use to buy things from the marketplace, which eventually translate into more output of firms and more employment. Okay, so if this disposable income is very low, what that means is that the aggregate of workers cannot buy goods and services. And if they cannot buy goods and services, the businesses will suffer because they don't have patronage, because there's low disposable income. And so there's a bigger cost we are not considering. We cannot put in naira and kobo when the Nigerian workers are shortchanged, paid less wages, and they have to go to the market and buy products at market prices, which are fast rising. In the last 1 year alone, prices have increased, has quadrupled in most products. And if prices have quadrupled, it therefore means that the average Nigerian worker now earns in real wages 1/4 of what they were earning before. So what 30,000 naira could buy a year ago, what that means now is that you will need 120,000 naira to buy same today. It therefore means that the real wages of the Nigerian worker has moved from 30,000 to 6,000 to 7,000 naira in real terms in just the 1 year. So there's a cost attached to that too. So sometimes it's about looking at what is lost in the short run versus what will be lost in the long run. In the short run, the strike action will appear to cost Nigeria a lot of money, but the status quo will cost Nigeria more in disposable incomes, productivity, and growth of the economy. So we must balance this cost out to ensure that in the end, we choose the lesser devil. The devil of going on strike to force government to act and losing some billions must be compared with the devil of allowing the status quo to remain, and millions of Nigerian workers are paid stipends. That what they are paid is miserizing, is miserly. It cannot support the cost of living. So these are the things we consider. So there are no hard and fast rules here. So the debate on the table should be the total cost to the economy, total cost to the Nigerian people, total cost to the taxpayers of we allowing prices to run wild while income has stagnated.
Okay, yesterday, for example, there was a meeting of the President of the Senate, Speaker of the House of Representatives on the one hand, and then you had the leaders of the organized labor, essentially represented by the President of the Nigeria Labour Congress and his trade union Congress counterparts, talking about Festus Usifo. In the middle of these two, you had Minister of State for Labor and Employment. Now, the Minister of State for Labor and Employment did say, look, minimum wage has been 30,000 the whole time. Now, federal government has shut it up by 100% to say, we are offering 60,000. I mean, for basic mathematics, one would have thought 100% is a whole lot. I mean, what more should government be doing? I mean, for a government that has also paid, a country, I should say, because not necessarily President Tinubu's government, but we know how that before now, government would even borrow to pay salary. Is it realistic for labor to be asking for 494,000 naira?
When we do the calculations, it is not realistic. But then the economic crisis we deal with doesn't look realistic too. Who would have believed that in a year, the price of the naira to the dollar will jump fourfold? Who would have also believed too in a year that the price of petrol will move from 220 to 850, fourfold? Who would have also believed that the price of a bag of rice will move from 27,000 naira to 85,000 naira? These are difficult times. These are the realities. So we don't just look at the wages. We look at the cost of living. The cost of living has quadrupled in the last 1 year. Okay, so what Labour is asking, although unrealistic, is also responding to the unrealistic price increases and the unrealistic economic tantrums that has happened in the last 1 year. Okay, desperate situations often requires desperate measures. Let's go to the economics of it all. What Labour is asking is this: if government pays 400,000 to labor, then we will need at least 100 trillion budget to fund it. Okay, 400,000 minimum wage. If we translate that throughout the workers' stages, the government, we are already operating persistent deposits in the last 5 years. Now, if government does that, it therefore means that the deposit, the budget deficit will expand astronomically, and then government will need to borrow more to pay wages, which is unsustainable. We already have a lot of debt that we are funding, and then we now need to borrow more to fund wages. Whereas what we ought to be doing at this stage of development is spending more on capital projects. Now we now need to borrow to finance the revenue, the wage bill. That's number one problem. Number two is going to create a lot of unemployment. The government decides to pay that amount. Why? Because government will not be forced to take in all the workers it currently has. Government will need to retrench thousands of Nigerian workers to be able to sustain that bill. Okay. And thirdly, what about the private sector? When the government pays that wage, the entire private sector will be wiped out, because how many businesses outside the government can support that wage bill? It therefore means that the private sector itself will need to be finding a way to prune some of its workers, because workers in the private sector will not demand higher wages. Now, if the workers in the private sector demand higher wages and the productivity is not matched by those wages, the only option is for the private sector to lay off thousands of its workers and only hire essential workers. Okay, so there's a multiplier effect of all these things. So like I said, the asking for those wages without looking at the productivity of the economy itself is regressive and backward. The GDP of Nigeria has not increased astronomically in the last 10 years. The GDP of Nigeria remains between 400 and 500 billion in the last decade. So there's no evidence of increase in productivity of Nigerian workers. Okay, it doesn't translate to more money for the federal government. What we have simply been saying is that government is selling more oil, making more money, but the output of the economy is not growing. That is why we are seeing prices rise, because supply is not catching up to demand. In fact, Nigeria is growing in population, the needs are increasing, but the supply is not catching up to demand. And so that makes Nigeria predominantly a seller's market, not a buyer's market, where the sellers are king and the buyers are at the mercy of the sellers. All right. So when government raises these wages artificially without considering these economic fundamentals of budget and the implications of the budget, it will snowball. It will lead to massive unemployment. It will lead to massive inflation, which is already in the double digits. Inflation rate is above 30%. It will translate to more prices, higher prices for goods and services. It will create a whirlwind of economic vicious cycles of price increases, which is not what we want. So it is unrealistic from the economic standpoint. But like I told you, we are in desperate times. People are begging to survive. Prices are running. And so people are desperate to earn higher incomes. Beyond the sentiment, if you look at the problems the average Nigerian is having to deal with are the rising prices. Who will blame labor for asking for such a high amount? Who will do that? So these are difficult times. The negotiation has to do with go beyond wages and inflation. It has to go beyond increasing the productivity of Nigeria, expanding the capacity of Nigeria to produce goods and services, allowing foreign investment to create more jobs. We need to expand our economic spectrum. The current structure of our economy is weak, rudimentary, and backward. It does not support the population growth of this country. And we have a lot of skilled people who are out of jobs. If you want to know that Nigeria is a seller's market, consider the fact that anytime a job opening is advertised, 1,000 people will try to apply for an office that will only hire 2 people. It therefore means that we cannot worsen that situation by raising wages of those who are working. The federal government employs about 700,000 people in this country, and let's add the state governments together. Let's assume that 4-5 million Nigerians are hired by the government. So what happens to the other 220 million Nigerians who do not work in the formal sector? When you raise the wages of the formal sector, what happens to the millions of kiosk businesses that cannot afford to pay their workers 20,000 naira a month? It therefore means that they'll be starved of labor. There'll be heated competition for big companies in this country. It will increase the corruption, increase the survivor mentality, and snowball into something negative. We don't want that.
Mr. Obu, you know, a while back, we were talking about how we can address issues at the root causes. And like you mentioned, that one of the reasons why 400,000 and above minimum wage cannot be implemented is because of productivity. We don't have, there's no system in place to measure productivity, quite frankly. And then civil servants, we have situations where civil servants go to work and it's more like they just go to work for going to work, and then they manage other businesses elsewhere, and they're not productive. So how, in tackling this, because this is one of the causes now, how do we ensure that we have a productive system, a productive economy? How do we measure productivity at this level so that we can begin to, you know, yield desired output?
Yes, the current system we're operating is a rentier system. Nigeria is still predominantly run by the government, and government is still the largest employer of labor. But to improve the productivity of the economy, we have to be looking for diversification options, okay? The biggest employers of labor in any well-organized society is not government, it is the private sector, okay? We need to be investing more in entrepreneurship. We need to be investing more in infrastructure. We need to be attracting foreign investment into critical sectors of the economy. We need to be investing in innovative enterprises that earn a lot of income. We need to be expanding our GDP. Like I said, a population of 220 million people generating a total GDP of 430 to 40 billion is totally unproductive. The per capita income in Nigeria is just about $2,500. So we have big challenges. I'll give you a statistic. South Africa, for instance, is generating over $400 billion of GDP, but the population of South Africa is just 55 million. Okay, the United States of America generates a GDP of $222 trillion. Okay, with a population of 330 million people, whereas the whole of Africa, with 1.6 billion people, generates only about $2 trillion of GDP. It therefore means that the United States of America, which is 300 million people, is more productive than Africa's 1.6 billion people times 10. That is not acceptable. It therefore means that Nigeria is a consumer nation, not a producer nation. Nigeria has no business selling only crude oil to the world. We should be expanding production into manufacturing, services, high-level services, high-level agriculture. We should be producing far more than we consume. But as it is now, we are at the mercy of the entire world. Nigeria has become a market instead of a production hub. So this requires billion-dollar investments into critical sectors of the economy, mining, steel. Nigeria has one of the best forms of steel in the world in Alajana, Jakarta, and yet Nigeria is not a world steel producer. No steel is coming out from those plants, and yet Nigeria has the purest form of steel in the world, hematite. Why are we not investing in steel? Nigeria has arable land that can feed 1 billion people, and yet we are not the biggest agricultural producers. 70% of Nigerians are engaged in agriculture, but the output from the agricultural sector contribution to GDP is no more than 20%. This is a misnomer. Nigerians are big consumers. We should be producers. We should be the China of Africa. And like I said, as long as we continue to run this rentier patronage economy, it's rudimentary. We are not yet prepared for industrialization. And for industrialization to take off in this country, that we employ more people, put more people in jobs in the private sector, we need to get our power right. We need to get our basic infrastructure right. We need to get our engineering industry right. We need to invest in vocational education, which is more important to growing a nation than this high-level university education. We have more office people than factory people, okay? We need to redesign our economy to support production, not that type that supports consumption. Okay, these are big problems that require big thinking, new, fresh thinking, fresh ideas, require more political will. But unfortunately, we don't yet have leaders who are thinking in that direction. We talk about it in rhetorics, we talk about diversification, but in the last 10 years, I have not seen any major effort towards the diversification. Oil is still our biggest source of income, and it shouldn't be for a country that is growing in population, that has 90 million youths. What are these people doing? What are the potentials of these youths? What are the sectors? What are the companies that we employ them? Okay. Only, for example, Volkswagen alone in Europe employs over 400,000 people. Coca-Cola employs over 140,000 people. The biggest employer, private sector employer in Nigeria does not hire up to 15,000 people. This is a misnomer. We should be having more private sector companies that can boast of employing 50,000 Nigerians. But how would they be able to do that in a country without power, without security, without government support for the private sector? These are the major problems.
It's a good thing that you are from Edo State. In fact, you have joined us live on this program from Benin City, the state's capital. The governor of the state, Godwin Obaseki, a man who has been there for almost 8 years now and has been able to, as some people would assess him, create some sort of fusion between the private sector and the core civil service. In other words, he's been able to introduce some very fundamental and drastic elements of the private sector, himself being a private sector-oriented man, all right, into the civil service. As of today, we understand that minimum wage in Edo State is 70,000. Whereas the federal government is offering 60 at the federal level. Some people say that could become even motivation for the labor, the organized labor, that is, to continue with this strike.
Yes, yes. People will say that. You say the federal government has a lot to handle than the state government, for instance. The state government control local taxes. They also get allocations from the federal government. The federal government does not have allocations from the state government. So we must understand the difference between the federal government and the state government. Okay. Now, the state government of Edo State is, I think the advantage Edo State has, they have a governor who runs according to corporate governance rules. Okay. He pays on time. He's more interested. He's running Edo State like a business economy. And so he's able to manage the little resources Edo State has from all its sources to pay workers more. The federal government can also do that. But that's because there's a lot of slowdown in political buccaneering. There's a lot of fight against systemic corruption in Edo State. And so we do not see politicians making billions from the economy of Edo State because this man is running the government as a private sector-led organization. And so Edo State can afford to pay on time and pay 70,000 naira without us noticing the effect on our purse. The federal government cannot be said to follow the same rules. There's a lot of corruption and mismanagement in the federal government. There's a lot of over-bloated spending, white elephant projects. And so the federal government does not have the administrative structure to support a civil service and pay the rates that they ought to pay. Just imagine the billions that are stolen in federal government allocations. Just imagine the amount of money they spend on foreign trips and those kind of things. Just imagine, just the other day I heard that over 90 billion was marked for Hajj. Nigeria is not a Muslim society, it's a secular state. But when we are talking about funding the student scholarship, student finance program, they were just pegging it at 5 billion. But it was quick to allocate 90 billion for Hajj. These are misplacement of priorities that makes it difficult for the federal government to pay what the civil servants deserve. Because there's a lot of mismanagement, there's a lot of lack of focus. The federal government is not oriented towards the Nigerian worker. And I know the reason why. Most of the incomes Nigerians earn does not come from their productivity. It comes from the oil. Oil sector generates over 90% of federal government revenue. So there's no incidence of productivity on the Nigerian worker. The civil service mentality means that we go to work, we don't do productive services, and then we earn money from the oil economy. Whereas if the federal government was getting most of these monies, it used to run the economy from taxes, from productive ventures, then they'll be more prudent in spending it. But as it is, what we have is a structure of an economy that is rentier, that is mineral resource based, where the income does not flow from the productive workers, but it flows from the oil industry, which is incidentally outward. And so we drill this oil, sell it, and make billions of dollars, and then we use it to pay workers. We do not have a production-based economy. And so the federal government, anytime they increase wages, they are just doing it, they feel they are doing it just for political considerations. They don't really see the workers of Nigeria generating more money for them. They see the source of income as coming from oil. And the statistics supports it, that without oil, Nigeria will not exist.
For a minute there, we're losing stream, right? Audio in particular. We're just going to ask the very last question before we end this conversation. But it turns out Destiny Awobu couldn't just land on that narrative that he was pushing just a minute ago. Let's take a quick break and we're back shortly. We understand we have Destiny Awobu, our guest, back on now. So, Destiny, you were making a very brilliant point with the dynamics around the state and federal systems just a while ago. I'm sure you would like to land on that point quickly.
So, like I said, Edo State basically is supposed to be a civil service state, but the government in the last 8 years has been trying to diversify the state by inviting business players to come and play in the sector. And we have seen this happen. We have noticed that a lot of merchandising companies have come to Benin City, to especially supermarkets and others, to try to support the government in raising more income for the state. The GDP of Edo State has risen from about 12 billion to nothing less than 20 billion in the last 8 years. It means that the state is growing aside the state government effort. The private sector is growing. Population of Edo State is expanding. People are coming from other states to come and make money from Edo State. It means that the economy is growing. The same thing cannot be said about the federal government. The GDP of the entire country has stagnated between 400 to 500 billion in the last decade. We have not seen any major expansion in output. And so we cannot say that the federal government now has more money to pay more workers, unlike the state government that is growing. In fact, some states in Nigeria are expanding because of the ingenuity and creativity of their governors. Lagos State can afford to pay because it's an industrial economy. Lagos State controls 35% of the GDP of Nigeria. Port Harcourt, Rivers can also pay because Rivers State is a hub of production. Kano can pay because Kano is a hub. Kaduna can pay. But beyond these 5, 6, 7 states that are mostly in the southwest that can generate income without the aid of the federal government and pay their workers, how many states in Nigeria can afford to do that? And then everybody has to depend on the federal government. So the federal government has 36 states to run. Out of these 36 states, only about 6 to 10 states generate the entire income, 90% of the income that the federal government has to depend on. So, and they have to share this income according to a certain quota arrangement, such that every part of the economy has some balance, form of development. But the federal government has not grown total income because we have not been able to diversify Nigeria as an entity away from oil into other critical sectors like energy, like steel, like other forms, mineral resources, other forms of mineral resources apart from crude oil. We've not been able to do that. We still depend on our old oil economy, which will not support the growing population of this country in the years to come. So these are the big questions. These are the problems the federal government is facing, which makes it different from that of the state government.
Let me just ask you this by way of adding some ice into the cake, as they say now, right? We all know that essentially this hardship that Nigerians are suffering or dealing with started with the removal of fuel subsidy. There are people who have said, if that's the case, why don't we revert to status quo? Practically what they're saying is, why don't we return the system of paying subsidy so that at least Nigerians can heave a sigh of relief for a second, or as the president will say, so that citizens can breathe?
That would be a regressive form of thinking, because one of the reasons why we allowed the subsidy to go is to attract private investors into that sector. Okay, what if Nigerians are feeling terrible about the increase in prices? There's a better solution to the problem. Nigerians should organize themselves into corporations and invest in the oil industry and become sellers of petrol instead of net buyers. Okay, that is the long-term solution. The only way to bring prices down using market forces is to increase supply of the product and to increase companies that produce that product. We should be looking at the supply side question, not the demand side. Anytime we are talking about prices going down for petrol, we are just more sympathetic to the consumers of petrol. We forget that the people who sell this petrol, they are enjoying it. They are in business right now. They are ripping off Nigerians at that current price. So what we need to be doing is encouraging more greedy people like that to invest in that sector such that they will compete. You were in this country that one time when the cell phone companies came to this country for the first time. And then I remember buying a SIM card for 25,000 naira 15 years ago when it was just one company. When the second company came, the price fell to about 8,000 naira. Now, with more Nigerians using the cell phones and the competition between these companies, you can get a SIM card for 500 naira. Now, that's how the market works. For setting, if you want prices to go down, you should be looking at the supply aspect, not the demand. Okay, bringing the price down and adding the subsidy more will not encourage more productivity. It will even make us more lazy. So if we feel bad in the moment, but there's a long-term solution. The government, the people should be looking at organizing production by looking at how to supply more of that petrol. Let competitors play in that industry. And then what you are seeing now is just simply a consequence of our failed actions. We are not looking at just this government alone, our collective failures. How can Nigeria have 4 refineries in 40 years and no one can boast of producing at maximum capacity? Nigeria as a country should have nothing less than 80 refineries, given that we have crude oil here. Why have we not had more refineries in this country? Because the business has been controlled by the government. The prices have been not market-based. It has been based on political considerations. Now we are having a market-based economy and then we are feeling the heat. We should encourage more market-based economy so that more Nigerians will become more productive, produce more refineries, and generate more market-based income. That is how the society develops, not using artificial government policies to fix prices that will benefit more people in the short run, but in the long run, shortchange the people.
Thank you very much, Mr. Owobo. Thank you for your time with us. Your contributions are truly appreciated by us, and we hope that you grace our platform again.
Thank you very much for having me.
You'll have a beautiful day ahead. We'll take a quick break now.
You too.
And when we return, the conversation continues around other topical issues. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
We just finished our discussion, first discussion, by the way, with Destiny Wobu, talking about the economics of industrial action. But then we're hearing now that labor enforcers, that is those who are enforcing this indefinite strike on the ground across the cities in this nation now, for the nation's capital, Abuja, we're just getting word that some persons had already been boarded, about to hit the tarmac, but then labor enforcers showed up and disembarked all of them. We're just going to play you a clip to establish the reality on the ground this morning. So that's just to bring a bit of actuality as to what's happening this morning regarding this strike. Of course, you know how it goes with strike. Personally, I'd been at a training some 6 years ago, 2018 was September of that year, I can't forget, and there was this sort of industrial indefinite action too. I can't forget, that was supposed to be like our day of convocation, and they stormed the whole place, and we couldn't have a ceremony. They just had to quickly hand us our certificates. People were busy taking pictures with their phones. They couldn't have the kind of party they had planned and all of that. So I can imagine how it feels like for these travelers who had already been on board and then had to be disembarked. Not that they had to disembark themselves, they had to be disembarked by those who are enforcing these this indefinite strike, which means that it's already taking a toll, like I guess
like Mr. Wobu mentioned. Yes, and I cannot even imagine the strain that it will pose on travelers who have important meetings. Some people who are at the airports have meetings as far as a job interview, a project, wedding, you know, key pivotal issues and that are necessary for them, their future, their career and everything just stalled in one moment because of the strike. And then monies are going to be lost as well. Right. So these are the adverse effects that Mr. Wobu spoke about. But we still hope that there's some sort of agreement or a middle ground is reached before the end of this week.
And as already indicated, people are also concerned about how that this is coming in the middle of Hajj. And it has the potential of disrupting flight schedules too.
Yes, like we see in the papers this morning that pilgrims, those that are to travel, the process for Hajj and all of that are going to be affected by this industrial
because it cannot be airlifted while the strike lasts.
Yes, because obviously these are people who are at the airports and now they've been. And
this is just the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Abuja, so you have no idea what's happening across other airports.
In Lagos and other international, another airports. Right. So these are the issues. Again, while we're trying to address one issue, that brings me back to my question of how do we address these issues in a way that it does not, while we're trying to address one, we don't create other issues.
That's right. One step forward, four backwards.
4 steps backward. So that's my question again. So I hope that with seeing this, that the NLC could be considerate enough to look for another means that I hope would yield the desired outcome or results where, you know, there's fairness and there's balance for both the NLC and then the federal government.
You know, we're getting unconfirmed reports. I mean, this is not a report that has been independently verified by Global Television, but it alleges that Labour Union has shut down the national grid. The TCN is reportedly saying that Labour enforcers have come to shut down the national grid, resulting in a blackout as a nationwide strike begins, which means, again, the toll is with us now. Hopefully this will speed up the process of dialogue and all else equal, we're able to reach some sort of closure as quickly as possible between the government and the organized labor.
The organized labor, absolutely. Because now, though not verified yet, but if this were to be the case now, businesses are going to be affected, no doubt. Households, homes, everything is going to be affected, and then that's more problem for the system that we're already complaining about. So like you rightly said, hopefully dialogue is, they come to an agreement, they have, a balanced dialogue so that we can move forward. We should be thinking of moving forward. I know that a 400,000 naira minimum wage and above is going to, no doubt, skyrocket inflation that we're already facing now. And like Mr. Awobu said, he made very valid and salient points, no doubt, that we're battling with a system that is unproductive, quite frankly. The root cause, what we should be talking about now is how do we become more productive
as a country,
so that when we're talking about job creation, because one of the issues is that there's no job, unemployment rate is high, and the very few people that have jobs, we are now saying that a 400,000 naira and above salary, minimum wage should be the case. There's going to be inflation and corruption, high-level corruption, right there. So, but my point now is, how do we become more productive? We have a system where civil servants don't even go to work. There's no evaluation system or monetary system, I don't know about now. But for the most of it, for the most part, as far back as 10, 15 years back, and even until recently, we have cases where you walk into offices. The other day, online, a young girl was crying because who was supposed to be her supervisor or something that has to do with school, the person has not been in office for quite a while now, and it's taking a toll on her, affecting her academics. That is high level of productivity for the university system that we are.
But the guy comes back, or the lady comes back later and collects salary.
And collects salary.
And even joins the strike.
And even joins the strike. This is what we're talking about. For something that you do not do, so for an office that you don't come to. So my question, what I'm talking about now is, how do we measure productivity? We should go back to the drawing board, go back to the root causes where we can be productive, so that when we're talking about minimum wage, our output we can yield greater output, and then we can come to a balance where we can have a fair minimum wage for all, and there will be flow,
commercial
resources,
activities.
commercial activity.